The story of 1929 and this book is not just a story of a financial crash. It's actually the story of 1929, 1930, 1931, 1932, 1933, because it was a series of dominoes. The crash was really the first domino, and then a series of terrible policy errors along the way that made things extraordinarily worse, that ultimately ended in 25% unemployment in 1932 and the stock market declining in 1932 by 90%. And so the question is, if you're standing there in 1929, what could have you done? So President Hoover only becomes the president in March 4th, 1929. He doesn't have a lot of time to jump in front of the train. The Federal Reserve back then knew there was a problem. All the debates, you could see in the diaries and the memos that I found, they're all worried out of their minds that things are getting completely out of control. But they're so scared about the political ramifications of if they were to, for example, raise interest rates to try to tamp all this down, that they would somehow topple over the rest of the economy. And so what were you supposed to do? Now, I think the answer is you should have tried to just raise interest rates like crazy and try to effectively probably change the way the margin loans were being made. You could have prevented them.
By the banks.
By the banks. I mean, the banks were loaning you put down $1, they'd give you 10. So you could have come in and said, nobody can take on more than 2 times leverage or something like that. Maybe that would have stopped it. But it wasn't just that. It was then you have this crash, which oddly enough, and this was a surprise for me, takes the stock market down between October and by November 13th down about 50%. But by the end of the year, oddly enough, was only down about 17, 18%. But because everybody...
So it's a correction at that point.
It's a correction at that point, except that all of America had done this with loaned money. So when the stock dropped 50%, it wasn't just they had lost the 50% value of the equity that they owned. It was that they lost everything. All of a sudden, they're having to mortgage their home. They're having to sell their home. They have nothing. And so it almost created a sort of generationally scarring moment. And nobody had enough money to put it back in the market when it went up to only get to that 17% down moment.